The foreclosure notice arrived on a windy Tuesday morning in October, tucked between a water bill and a credit card offer, as if its life-shattering contents were just another piece of mundane mail. Notice of eviction, 30 days to vacate premises. Rebecca Turner stared at the bold red letters, feeling her world collapse as she stood in the cramped kitchen of her two-bedroom apartment. Through the thin walls, she could hear her 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, practicing her violin, blissfully unaware that their lives were about to be upended yet again. Not now, not like this, Rebecca whispered, scanning the document for any possible exception or extension. There wasn't one. The entire building had been sold to developers planning luxury condominiums. All tenants had 30 days to find new housing. No exceptions, no extensions. Outside the kitchen window, the Oak Ridge sky hung gray and heavy with impending rain, mirroring the storm brewing in Rebecca's mind. At 36, she hadn't imagined she would be here, a single mother with a master's degree in computer engineering, recently laid off when her tech company replaced her entire department with AI systems. Now facing homelessness in a rental market that seemed designed to exclude people exactly like her. She placed the eviction notice on the counter and took a deep breath, mentally calculating their options. Her savings had dwindled to just under $850 after 5 months of unemployment. Her parents had passed years ago, and friends had already assisted as much as they could during the initial weeks after her layoff. "Mom, come listen to this part. I finally got it right," Sophie called from the living room, her voice bright with the innocent pride of childhood. Rebecca quickly wiped away a tear before stepping out of the kitchen with a forced smile. "That sounds beautiful, sweetheart," she said, admiring her daughter's dedication to an instrument that they could barely afford to rent. Sophie had shown remarkable talent from the first day she held a violin, a natural gift that had earned her a coveted audition for the prestigious Philadelphia Youth Orchestra despite their financial limitations. "My teacher says if I keep practicing like this, I might get the solo at the winter concert," Sophie explained carefully, placing her violin in its case. "And maybe someday I can play in a real orchestra that travels around the world performing in places where people don't have access to music education." Rebecca's heart twisted. How could she tell her daughter that they might soon have no place to practice, that the stability she'd fought so hard to maintain was crumbling beneath them? That night, after Sophie was asleep, Rebecca opened her laptop and began the desperate search for affordable housing. The numbers on the screen mocked her. One-bedroom apartments rented for nearly twice what she currently paid for their two-bedroom. Application fees alone would quickly deplete what remained of her savings. Every listing demanded proof of income 3 times the monthly rent, impossible on unemployment benefits that barely covered groceries and Sophie's essential school expenses. The national housing crisis had hit Pennsylvania hard, with rents up 35% in just 2 years and affordable units vanishing as investment firms bought up properties. She expanded her search radius, looking at towns farther from Sophie's school places, with longer commutes to potential jobs areas, with higher crime rates anywhere that might have something, anything they could afford. Each option seemed worse than the last. By 1:30 a.m., desperation drove her to search bankruptcy auctions, foreclosed properties, abandoned buildings, distressed real estate being liquidated to recoup debts. Most were dilapidated houses requiring massive renovations or vacant lots in remote areas. And then she saw it. Former automotive repair shop. Minimum bid $500, sold as is. Rebecca almost scrolled past it. What would she do with an abandoned mechanic shop? But something made her click on the listing. There were only 4 photos: a weathered brick building with large garage doors, an interior filled with abandoned equipment, a small office space with broken windows in an aerial view, showing the property on a corner lot in Oak Ridge, a small town about 45 minutes from their current apartment. The description was sparse. Former Jenkins Auto Repair, $400 square foot main floor with office. Property includes all remaining equipment and fixtures. Structure sound but needs significant renovation. No utilities currently connected. Zoned commercial residential. 25 minutes from Philadelphia. Property sold as is. Rebecca's exhausted mind began to calculate improbable possibilities. The main garage could perhaps be converted into living space. The office area might become Sophie's bedroom. The commercial residential zoning meant they could legally live there while gradually renovating. It was insane. She was a computer engineer, not a contractor or mechanic. The property was far from Sophie's school and potential employment opportunities. And yet, what if this was their only option? What if 500 or whatever the final bid might be was the price of never having to worry about a landlord's whims again? This is absolutely crazy, she told herself, closing the laptop. But as she lay in bed listening to the neighbor's television through the wall, the idea refused to fade. By morning, what had seemed like midnight madness had crystallized into their best, perhaps only option for housing security. Ottawa. The county courthouse was an imposing brick building with wide marble steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Rebecca arrived 40 minutes early, clutching her bitter registration papers and trying to look more confident than she felt. The auction room was already half filled with people in business attire, professional investors, and developers who did this regularly. "First auction?" asked an elderly woman with kind eyes, noticing Rebecca nervously adjusting her bitter paddle. Rebecca nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "We all start somewhere," the woman said, introducing herself as Margaret Wilson. "Been attending these auctions for over 30 years. Looking for anything specific today?" "Actually, yes," Rebecca admitted. "The old Jenkins Auto Repair Shop." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Interesting choice. Those commercial conversions can be challenging, but that building has good bones. What are you planning to do with it?" "Live in it," Rebecca said, then quickly added, "eventually. Convert the office first, then gradually work on the main garage space." Instead of laughing, Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Makes more sense than you might think. That building has solid brick construction, high ceilings, and the lot is a decent size. The hard part is plumbing and making it properly livable." "I'm a computer engineer," Rebecca said, "or was until my company downsized me in favor of AI systems. I know it's unconventional, but I'm out of conventional options." "Unconventional is how innovation happens," Margaret interrupted. "And between us, I doubt you'll have much competition for that property. Most developers want quick flips in residential neighborhoods, not long-term projects in small towns." As they continued talking, Rebecca learned that Margaret had been an architect who had worked on military installations during the Reagan administration. "I specialized in adaptive structures buildings that serve dual purposes or could be quickly converted for emergency use." "Like shelters?" Rebecca asked. "Among other things," Margaret replied cryptically. "The early 80s were an interesting time for construction. The Cold War created unique architectural challenges." She glanced at her watch. "Looks like they're getting ready to start. Good luck with your mechanic shop. Sometimes the most unlikely spaces make the best homes." Margaret's prediction proved partially accurate. When Lot 17, former Jenkins Auto Repair, came up for auction, the room remained quiet after the auctioneer announced the minimum bid of $500. Rebecca raised her paddle hard, hammering in her chest. "500 from bidder number 23, the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 550? A man in the back casually raised his paddle. "550 from bidder number 8. "Do I hear 600? Rebecca raised her paddle again, silently calculating how much higher she could go. "Not much." "600 from bidder number 23. "Do I hear 650? The man in the back raised his paddle again. "50 from bidder number 8. "Do I hear 700? Rebecca raised her paddle, holding her breath. This was pushing her limit. "700 from bidder number 23. "Do I hear 750? The man in the back hesitated, then nodded slightly. $750 from bidder number 8. "Do I hear 800? Rebecca's hand trembled as she raised her paddle. This was her absolute limit. "800 from bidder number 23. "Do I hear $850? Rebecca held her breath. The room remained silent. The man in the back seemed to be deliberating, his face unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Just when Rebecca thought he would bid again, he shook his head slightly. "800 going once? Going twice?" The auctioneer scanned the room. "Sold to bidder number 23 for 800. The sharp crack of the gavel made Rebecca jump. Had that really just happened? Had she actually purchased a mechanic shop for less than the security deposit on most apartments? The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and transaction processing. The county clerk explained that the property had been abandoned for nearly 4 years, with property taxes unpaid since the original owner, Harold Jenkinson, had passed away with no immediate heirs. "Interested in the business?" the clerk asked. "You'll need to file for change of use permits if you're planning to live there, and you might need environmental assessments." These old automotive shops sometimes have contamination issues from oil and chemicals. By noon, Rebecca Turner, single mother, unemployed computer engineer, and now owner of a defunct auto repair shop, clutched a set of keys and property deed in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "Congratulations," Margaret said, finding her in the courthouse hallway. "That's quite an adventure you're embarking on." "I'm still not sure if I'm brilliant or desperate," Rebecca admitted. "Sometimes those qualities are two sides of the same coin," Margaret replied with a wink. "Here's my card. I've done some unusual renovations over the years. Call me if you need advice or contractor recommendations." Rebecca noticed something odd about Margaret's business card. Below her name was printed Wilson and Associates Architectural Consultants. But there was also a faded government seal partially visible in the background. Before she could ask about it, Margaret added, "That Jenkins place, it was built in the early 80s, wasn't it? 1983, according to the property records?" Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting timing. You might find some unusual features in a commercial building from that era in this region. Pennsylvania had quite a few civil defense projects back then." "Civil defense? You mean like fallout shelters?" "Among other things," Margaret said, echoing her earlier cryptic response. "The Cold War created infrastructure that most people never knew existed, hiding in plain sight." With that enigmatic comment, she walked away, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers. Rebecca couldn't wait to see her property up close. One quick call to Sophie's music teacher confirmed her daughter would be occupied with extra practice for the next 2 hours, giving Rebecca time for a quick inspection before picking her up. The drive took her through increasingly rural landscapes, past farms and small clusters of houses, until she reached Oak Ridge, a town small enough that the mechanic shop was easy to find without GPS. The brick building stood on a corner lot, weathered but solid, with large garage doors facing the street and smaller windows along the side. A faded sign still hung above the entrance: "Jenkins Auto Repair, honest work, fair prices." The surrounding lot was overgrown with weeds pushing through cracks in the concrete, but the structure itself appeared stable. No obvious roof damage, the brick walls intact, despite some graffiti on one side. Using the key from the auction, Rebecca unlocked the pedestrian door beside the larger garage entrances. The smell hit her first, the distinctive scent of a long-abandoned space. Oil dust and metal. Sunlight streamed through dirty windows, illuminating floating dust particles and casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The main garage space was approximately 40 feet square, with high ceilings and 2 vehicle bays. An ancient hydraulic lift occupied one bay, its metal surface covered in rust. Abandoned tools and equipment were scattered throughout, some potentially salvageable, others clearly beyond repair. The walls were lined with empty shelves, tool cabinets, and automotive posters from decades past. A calendar from 1985 still hung on one wall, frozen in time. Rebecca recognized the classic cars pictured her father had owned, 1877 Chevrolet Impala, that he had meticulously maintained, teaching her basic automotive maintenance in their driveway every Sunday. At the back, a door led to what had been the office, a smaller room about 15 feet square, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a small bathroom. Beyond that was another room that might have been a break room or storage area with a sink and countertop along one wall. As an engineer, Rebecca assessed the space with a critical eye. The building structure appeared sound. The brick walls were solid. The roof didn't show signs of major leakage, and the concrete floor, while stained and cracked in places, was intact. And the plumbing would need work. The electrical system, a complete overhaul, but the bones were good. With careful planning and gradual improvements, this could indeed become a home. She was examining the office space, mentally converting it into Sophie's bedroom, when something caught her attention: the hydraulic lift in the main garage area. It didn't look quite right. Most vehicle lifts were centered in their bays, but this one was positioned slightly off-center, and the floor around it had a different texture than the surrounding concrete. Curious, Rebecca returned to the main garage and examined the lift more carefully. The control panel that would normally raise and lower the platform was missing, removed or salvaged long ago. However, there was another smaller panel partially hidden behind what remained of a tool cabinet. This panel looked different, newer than the other abandoned equipment, with a keypad lock that seemed oddly sophisticated for a small-town mechanic shop. This wasn't standard automotive equipment. She examined the panel more closely, noting that, while it appeared to be electronic, there was no obvious power source. Yet when she touched it, small indicator lights flickered briefly, suggesting some kind of backup power system was still functioning. The keypad had numbers 0 and 9 and two additional buttons marked only with symbols, one resembling a gear, the other a shield with a star. Without the code, there was no way to activate whatever system this controlled. Rebecca continued exploring the property, making mental notes of immediate needs versus longer-term projects. The office could be converted to living space relatively quickly. The bathroom needed work, but had the basic plumbing in place. The main garage would require more extensive renovation, but offered the most space for eventual development. As she prepared to leave, something on the floor near the mysterious panel caught her eye, a faded sticker partially hidden beneath dust and grime. Kneeling, she wiped it clean to reveal a government property tag with a faded identification number and the letters U.S. STRATCOM barely visible beneath years of dirt. U.S. STRATCOM, United States Strategic Command, a unified combatant command of the U.S. Department of Defense. What was a military property tag doing in an abandoned mechanic shop in Oak Ridge, with more questions than answers? Rebecca locked up the building and returned to her car. As she drove to pick up Sophie, her mind raced with both practical concerns about their new property and curiosity about the unusual lift and control panel. That evening, as they ate dinner in their soon-to-be former apartment, Rebecca decided to share the news with Sophie. "I did something pretty big today," she began carefully. "Something that might sound strange at first." Sophie looked up from her pasta, curious. "What kind of strange?" "I bought us a new place to live. It's very different from our apartment. Actually, it's an old mechanic shop that we'll need to fix up." Sophie's fork paused midway to her mouth. "A mechanic shop, like where they fix cars?" "Exactly. It has a big garage area and some smaller rooms we can convert into proper living spaces. It needs work, but it will be ours. No landlord, no rent increases, no surprise evictions." Instead of showing concern, Sophie's eyes widened with excitement. "That's so cool. Will I get to help fix it up? Can I design my own room? Does it have those cool lifts that make cars go up in the air?" Rebecca laughed, a relief washing over her. "Yes to all of that. And it actually does have an old vehicle lift, though it probably doesn't work anymore." "This is the coolest thing ever," Sophie declared. "None of my friends live in a mechanic shop. Can I tell Ms. Nelson? She's always talking about creative housing solutions and social studies." As they discussed their new home, Rebecca decided to keep her discovery of the military property tag, an unusual control panel, to herself for now. There was no need to complicate their adventure with mysteries until she understood more about what she had found. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Rebecca researched U.S. STRATCOM and possible connections to small-town infrastructure. Most information was general. STRATCOM had been established to provide command and control of U.S. nuclear forces and had evolved to encompass broader strategic deterrence missions. Nothing explained why their property tag would be in an abandoned mechanic shop. She expanded her search to include the history of Oak Ridge itself. The town had been established in the 1940s, growing around a manufacturing plant that produced components for military vehicles during World War II. After the war, the plant had converted to civilian manufacturing before eventually closing in the 1990s, leading to Oak Ridge's gradual economic decline. One article caught her attention, a local history piece mentioning that during the Cold War, several businesses in Oak Ridge had participated in a federal program called Civilian Infrastructure Support Initiative. The program was vaguely described as enhancing civil defense preparedness, but details were sparse. Could Jenkins Auto Repair have been part of this initiative? And if so, what exactly did that entail? Her research led her to declassified documents about various Cold War-era civil defense programs. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the federal government had established numerous continuity of government facilities, bunkers, communication centers, and command posts disguised as ordinary businesses or concealed underground. But most of these programs had been scaled back or abandoned by the 1970s, except for a brief resurgence in the early 1980s during the Reagan administration, when Cold War tensions had escalated again. The timing aligned perfectly with the construction of Jenkins Auto Repair in 1983. Rebecca's research was interrupted by an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, peterson@redacted.gov. The message was brief. "Regarding your purchase of the former Jenkins property in Oak Ridge, we should talk." Certain infrastructure elements were left in place that may be of interest to national security. Please call 703-555-0142 at your earliest convenience. Rebecca stared at the message, a chill running through her. How had they contacted her so quickly? How did they know what she had found? As Sophie slept peacefully in the next room, excited about their super cool car house, Rebecca realized their housing solution had just become infinitely more complicated. What had begun as a desperate bid for shelter had now entangled them in something far beyond real estate, something that had the attention of people who operated in shadows and spoke the language of national security. And yet, despite the fear now mingling with her uncertainty, Rebecca felt a strange new resolve forming. This abandoned mechanic shop wasn't just shelter, it was leverage. Whatever she had discovered beneath that vehicle lift, someone wanted it badly enough to contact her within hours of her finding it. For a woman who had felt powerless against eviction notices in an unforgiving job market, this new dynamic, as unsettling as it might be, offered something she hadn't felt in months, a position of strength. The following day, Rebecca took Sophie to see their new home. She decided that transparency within limits was the best approach. Their mechanic shop adventure would be exciting enough without adding mysterious government connections to the mix. It's going to need a lot of work, Rebecca cautioned as they parked in front of the brick building, but I think we can make it amazing. Sophie barely heard the warnings, ready rushing toward the entrance, her boundless 10-year-old energy propelling her forward. It's like our own secret headquarters. This framing delighted Rebecca. That's exactly what it is, our headquarters for starting over. Inside, Sophie's reaction to the dusty, abandoned space was pure wonder. Where Rebecca saw challenges, outdated wiring, possible contamination, costly renovations, Sophie saw possibilities. The high ceilings could hold a rope swing. The office could become a music studio with perfect acoustics for her violin. The break room could transform into a science lab for her experiments. "Look at all this cool old stuff," Sophie exclaimed, examining a dusty workbench covered with forgotten tools. "Can we keep some of it? Mr. Rodriguez at school teaches us about vintage technologies." "We can certainly preserve some of the character," Rebecca agreed, watching her daughter catalog ancient wrenches and tire gauges with fascination. When Sophie discovered a collection of faded automotive magazines from the 1980s, she settled on the floor, absorbed in images of cars that predated her birth by decades. Rebecca used this opportunity to examine the mysterious control panel more thoroughly, positioning herself to block Sophie's view. In daylight, she noticed something she'd missed before: a small metal plate above the keypad with nearly invisible engraved text. Wiping away years of grime, she made out the words, "Emergency Network Access Terminal. Authorized personnel only." Below this was a serial number, EN83057PA, Emergency Network, 1983, Pennsylvania. The pieces were beginning to align with her research about Cold War infrastructure. As Rebecca contemplated this discovery, her phone rang, an unknown number with a Northern Virginia area code, the same one from the email. "Hello," she answered, stepping away from Sophie. "Miss Turner, this is Robert Peterson, Department of Defense Strategic Infrastructure Division." The voice was measured, professional, with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. "Thank you for taking my call. I understand you've recently acquired the Jenkins property in Oak Ridge." "That's correct," Rebecca replied cautiously. "I'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss certain aspects of that property that may not have been disclosed during the sale. Nothing concerning, simply matters of historical infrastructure that my office monitors." "What kind of infrastructure are we talking about, Soal?" Rebecca asked, watching Sophie flip through the old magazines. There was a brief pause. "That's better discussed in person. Would tomorrow be convenient? I can come to Oak Ridge." Rebecca considered her options. Refusing might escalate the situation unnecessarily. Agreeing would at least give her more information about what she was dealing with. "Tomorrow at noon," she suggested. "There's a cafe called Madeline's on Main Street." "Public venues are not ideal for this discussion," Peterson countered smoothly. "Nevertheless, that's where I'm willing to meet," Rebecca insisted, determined to maintain some control over the situation. Another pause. "Very well. Noon tomorrow at Madeline's. I'll be wearing a navy blazer. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Turner." After ending the call, Rebecca rejoined Sophie, who had moved on from the magazines to exploring the small bathroom. Mom, this toilet is ancient. It's like from the dinosaur times of toilets. Rebecca laughed momentarily, forgetting her concerns about government officials and secret infrastructure. We'll definitely be updating that. They spent the afternoon measuring spaces and dreaming up renovation plans. Sophie's enthusiasm was infectious, transforming what could have been an overwhelming project into an exciting adventure. By the time they left, Rebecca had a preliminary list of immediate needs: a thorough cleaning, environmental testing for contaminants, basic electrical work to restore power, and plumbing repairs to make the bathroom functional. That evening, Rebecca called the number on Margaret Wilson's card. Margaret, it's Rebecca Turner from the auction. I wondered if I might ask you a few questions about my property. The Jenkins place. Certainly. How can I help? Rebecca hesitated, then decided on directness. I found something unusual there. A control panel with military markings. STRATCOM. The silence that followed was telling. I see, Margaret finally said. That's interesting. And now you've been contacted by someone from the government. Yes, how did you know? Because that's standard procedure when civilians acquire certain types of properties. Margaret's voice had lost its warmth, becoming professionally detached. I assume they want to meet tomorrow. What exactly is in my mechanic shop, Margaret? Another pause. I can't discuss specifics over the phone, but I can tell you that in the early 1980s, the Reagan administration expanded something called the Continuity of Government Program. After the Cuban Missile Crisis and other Cold War tensions, there was significant concern about maintaining essential government functions in case of a nuclear attack. And Jenkins Auto Repair was part of this program. Properties like yours were selected for their strategic locations and structural characteristics. They were modified to serve secondary purposes while maintaining their civilian appearances. Modified how? Rebecca pressed. That's what your government contact will explain, I imagine. My advice, listen carefully, but remember you legally own that property. Whatever's there, they can't simply take it from you without due process and compensation. They seem concerned about national security. They always are, Margaret replied dryly. But most of these systems were decommissioned decades ago. Their concern is likely bureaucratic, ensuring old secrets stay contained, tying up loose ends. After ending the call, Rebecca spent hours researching everything she could find about the Continuity of Government program. The information available painted a fascinating picture of a nation preparing for the unthinkable. A comprehensive network of bunkers, communication systems, and emergency facilities designed to preserve essential government functions in the aftermath of a nuclear attack. The more she read, the more certain she became. Beneath their mechanic shop lay something significant, perhaps an emergency communications node or a small command center. Something valuable enough to prompt a Department of Defense official to travel to a small Pennsylvania town on short notice. As she finally went to bed, Rebecca found herself thinking not just about the mystery beneath the mechanic shop, but about Margaret Wilson's cryptic comments. The former military architect seemed to know more than she was willing to say and had shown surprising interest in the Jenkins property from the moment they met at the auction. Had their meeting been entirely coincidental, or had Margaret recognized something about the property listing that had drawn her to Rebecca? Tomorrow's meeting with Robert Peterson might provide answers. But Rebecca suspected it would also bring new questions and perhaps new challenges to their already complicated situation. As she drifted off to sleep, Rebecca's last thought was of Sophie's innocent enthusiasm about their secret headquarters. Her daughter had no idea how accurate that description might actually be. So, the next morning, Rebecca arranged for Sophie to spend a few hours with her violin teacher, framing the government meeting as boring paperwork stuff related to their new property. Madeline's Cafe occupied a corner storefront on Oak Ridge's quiet Main Street, a neutral public location, where Rebecca felt more secure having this mysterious conversation. She arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. At precisely noon, a black government sedan with tinted windows pulled up outside. A tall man in his early 60s emerged, scanning the street before entering the cafe. His navy blazer was impeccably pressed, his bearing unmistakably military, despite the civilian clothes. The man spotted Rebecca immediately, perhaps from a photograph in her government records, and approached with a courteous nod. Ms. Turner, Robert Peterson, thank you for meeting with me. Rebecca gestured to the chair across from her. I'm curious to hear about the historical infrastructure in my new home. Peterson sat down, declining the menu offered by a waitress with a polite shake of his head. Once they were alone, he placed a thin leather portfolio on the table. Ms. Turner, I'll be direct. The property you purchased was once part of a classified program developed during the Cold War. Beneath the mechanic shop is a facility that served as an emergency communications node in a nationwide network designed to maintain essential government functions during a crisis. Despite her research, hearing the confirmation from an official source sent a chill through Rebecca. What kind of communications node? A regional relay station for the emergency broadcast system with direct links to military and civilian command centers. It was designed to be self-sufficient with independent power air filtration and supplies to sustain operations for up to 3 weeks. Rebecca processed this information. But it was abandoned. Not abandoned, decommissioned partially. After the Cold War ended, many such facilities were deemed redundant. Budget constraints led to a tiered system where some remained fully operational, others were placed in standby mode, and some were deactivated but preserved for historical record or potential reactivation. And mine, officially decommissioned in 1997, but the physical infrastructure remains intact, which brings me to the purpose of our meeting. Peterson opened his portfolio and removed several documents. The Department of Defense would like to arrange for the proper decommissioning of any remaining sensitive equipment. Rebecca studied him carefully. You want to remove everything? Only certain components with military applications. The facility itself, the bunker, the basic infrastructure, those would remain your property. There's an entire bunker down there. Peterson's expression revealed he'd said more than intended. Yes. Approximately 1,200 square feet of underground space, accessible through the hydraulic lift mechanism you've already discovered. Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities. An additional 1,200 square feet of usable space would transform their housing situation entirely. And if I refuse to allow this decommissioning, Peterson's professional demeanor cooled slightly. The government has options in matters of national security, including eminent domain. But we prefer cooperative solutions that respect property rights while addressing security concerns. I'm certainly open to cooperation, Rebecca said carefully, but I'd need to understand exactly what's down there before agreeing to anything. And I'd want assurances that any modifications wouldn't damage the property I legally purchased. That's reasonable, Peterson conceded. I'm authorized to offer a limited tour of the facility with appropriate non-disclosure agreements in place. And when we could arrange access as early as tomorrow. A technical team would accompany us to assess the equipment and explain the decommissioning process. Rebecca considered her options. This was moving quickly, perhaps too quickly. She needed more information and possibly leverage before proceeding. I'd like to bring a consultant with me, she said, someone with relevant expertise. Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly. This is a classified facility. Civilian access is strictly limited. Margaret Wilson, Rebecca said, watching his reaction carefully. She mentioned having worked on similar facilities during the Reagan administration. Recognition flickered across Peterson's face. Dr. Wilson, yes. She was involved in several projects of this nature. Her presence would be acceptable. This confirmation of Margaret's background strengthened Rebecca's suspicion that their meeting at the auction hadn't been coincidental. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. then, Rebecca agreed, with Dr. Wilson if she's available. As Peterson stood to leave, he hesitated. Ms. Turner, one more thing. There have been other individuals making inquiries about this property, people who may be aware of its historical significance. I would encourage discretion about what we've discussed today. What kind of people? Various interest groups, some collectors of Cold War memorabilia, others with more concerning motivations. Military infrastructure, even decommissioned, attracts attention. With that cryptic warning, Peterson departed, leaving Rebecca to wonder if she'd just received a genuine security caution or a calculated attempt to pressure her into cooperation. Either way, her mechanic shop had become considerably more complicated and potentially more valuable than she could have imagined when placing her desperate bid at the county auction. As she watched Peterson's government sedan pull away, Rebecca realized that their housing crisis had evolved into something entirely unexpected, a high-stakes negotiation with the Department of Defense over a Cold War relic buried beneath their new home. And tomorrow she would see exactly what lay beneath the rusty hydraulic lift in Jenkins Auto Repair. The next morning brought heavy rain drumming against the apartment windows as Rebecca prepared Sophie for school. She had arranged for her daughter to go home with a friend afterward, buying herself time for the bunker inspection without raising questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Will we go to our mechanic shop after school tomorrow?" Sophie asked, packing her violin case. "Definitely, Rebecca promised. "I'm handling some paperwork today, but tomorrow we can start planning your bedroom design." After dropping Sophie at school, Rebecca drove through the downpour to meet Margaret Wilson at a diner near the Oak Ridge town limits. The former military architect was already there nursing a cup of coffee and studying what appeared to be old blueprints spread carefully on the table. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said, sliding into the booth, "especially on such short notice." Margaret looked up, her expression serious. "When you mentioned STRATCOM access terminals, I realized your property might be more significant than I initially thought. You knew about it all along, didn't you? That's why you approached me at the auction." Margaret nodded, surprising Rebecca with her candor. "I recognized the address from my consulting work in the 80s. I was curious who would purchase it and what the government's response would be. So you used me as an experiment?" "I preferred to think of it as observation, but after our conversations, I developed genuine concern for your situation." Margaret gestured to the blueprints, "Which is why I brought these." Rebecca examined the document's technical drawings of what appeared to be a bunker complex with detailed specifications for communications equipment, power systems, and life support infrastructure. "Is this my mechanic shop?" "Not exactly. This is a standard design template for emergency broadcast network relay stations from the early 80s. Your facility will have variations based on the specific site, but the core elements should be similar." Rebecca studied the drawings with growing amazement. The template showed a sophisticated underground facility with multiple rooms, a communications center with radio equipment and early computer systems, sleeping quarters with 6 bunks, a small galley kitchen, storage areas for supplies, and most surprisingly, a completely independent infrastructure system, water tanks, air filtration, backup generators. "This is like a miniature survival bunker." "That was precisely the point," Margaret confirmed. "These facilities were designed to maintain essential communications for up to 3 weeks following a nuclear exchange. They were staffed during high alert periods by civilian contractors with security clearances, often the very people who owned the businesses above as their cover." "So Harold Jenkins was part of this program?" "Almost certainly. The government preferred recruiting small business owners with military backgrounds, patriots who understood the stakes and could be trusted with classified responsibilities." A new thought occurred to Rebecca. "Do you think Peterson is telling the truth about decommissioning, or do they want access for other reasons?" Margaret considered this. "The timeline matches the official decommissioning schedules I'm familiar with, but there's always more to these stories than what they tell civilians." She tapped a section of the blueprint showing communications equipment. Some of these systems were designed to be forward compatible with later technologies. It's possible components remain that could connect to modern networks. "Valuable components." Potentially, but more likely they're concerned about security vulnerabilities. Old communication systems that could be exploited, access codes that were never properly reset, documentation that reveals operational protocols still in use. Rebecca digested this information as they finished their coffee and prepared to meet Peterson at the property. The rain had intensified, turning the streets of Oak Ridge into glistening rivers reflecting the gray sky above. At the mechanic shop, they found Peterson waiting in the same black sedan, accompanied by a van marked Technical Services with government plates. 2 men in plain clothes stood beside the van, equipment cases at their feet. "Dr. Wilson," Peterson greeted Margaret with professional formality that suggested a history between them. "I didn't expect to see you involved in this matter." "Robert," Margaret replied with equal formality. "I'm here as Ms. Turner's consultant. Property owner's prerogative." Something unspoken passed between them. Old colleagues with a complicated history, perhaps. Inside the mechanic shop, Peterson introduced his technical team. Frank Mitchell, a retired communications specialist in his 70s, and a younger man identified only as Thompson, who remained notably silent throughout the introductions. Frank, however, immediately warmed to Rebecca with grandfatherly charm. So you're the new owner of this old place? Been a while since I've seen inside one of these relay stations. This model was part of my training rotation back in '83. You worked in these facilities? Rebecca asked. 30 years in emergency communications, ma'am. From the Cuban Missile Crisis right through the fall of the Berlin Wall. Spent more time underground than I care to remember. His weathered face creased with a smile. Never thought I'd be back in one of these places after retirement. As Peterson prepared to activate the bunker access, Rebecca noticed Frank studying the control panel with a nostalgic expression. Original Series C terminal, he murmured. They don't make them like this anymore. Built to withstand EMP blasts and still function. Peterson entered a code on the keypad different from anything Rebecca had tried in her explorations. The panel emitted a series of beeps, and suddenly the hydraulic lift that had appeared non-functional began to hum with power. The platform slid sideways rather than lifting upward, revealing a metal hatch in the floor where it had been positioned. The primary access point, Peterson explained, designed to be concealed yet quickly accessible during emergency activation. He turned a wheel lock on the hatch, and it swung upward to reveal a metal staircase descending into darkness. Lights automatically activated as the hatch opened, fully illuminating the stairway. Ladies and gentlemen, Peterson announced with unexpected solemnity, welcome to Emergency Network Node Eastern 057, one of the forgotten guardians of the Cold War. As Rebecca took her first step down the staircase, she couldn't help but feel she was descending, not just into a bunker, but into a chapter of history that had been deliberately erased from public memory. A secret world hidden beneath the ordinary surface of American life, waiting to be rediscovered. And somehow, through a desperate bid at a county auction, it had become hers. The staircase spiraled downward, metal steps echoing softly with each footfall. Rebecca counted 28 steps before reaching a small landing, then another short flight that opened into a space that made her gasp. She stood at the entrance to what appeared to be a fully preserved underground command center. Unlike the abandoned shop above, this facility showed no signs of neglect. The air was dry and surprisingly fresh, with a faint metallic undertone. Emergency lighting glowed along the ceiling, in recessed fixtures casting the space in a pale blue illumination that seemed almost otherworldly. Remarkable preservation, Margaret murmured behind her. These facilities were designed to last decades without maintenance. The main room was approximately 30 feet square, dominated by a central communications console with multiple workstations. Vintage computer terminals with phosphor-green screens sat dormant, their keyboards covered in protective plastic. Radio equipment lined one wall, dials and meters frozen in time. A large situation map of the eastern United States hung on another wall with small LED indicators embedded at strategic points, major cities' military installations, and other locations marked with coded symbols. Eastern 057 was a mid-tier relay station, Peterson explained, moving to the center of the room. Part of the emergency broadcast network's redundant communication grid. In the event of a nuclear attack, it would have maintained essential communication links between military command centers and civilian authorities. Frank Mitchell approached one of the workstations with reverent familiarity, running his fingers along the edge of an antiquated computer terminal. PDP-11 systems, state-of-the-art in '83. We could process emergency action messages and authentication codes, maintain status reports on radiation levels, coordinate evacuation routes, all the communications necessary for continuity of government. Continuity of government, Rebecca asked, though her research had already introduced her to the concept. Ensuring that essential government functions could continue even if Washington was destroyed, Peterson explained clinically. These facilities form the backbone of our national resilience strategy during the Cold War. Frank nodded toward a red telephone on the central console. That line went directly to the FEMA regional headquarters. Pick it up during a drill, and you'd better have the correct authentication codes ready, or you'd have some very unhappy federal agents at your door within the hour. Rebecca moved deeper into the facility, taking in the surreal time capsule. Beyond the main communications room, she found exactly what Margaret's blueprints had indicated. Living quarters with 6 neatly made bunks, a small galley kitchen with preserved military rations still in their original packaging storage areas, with supplies and a sophisticated air filtration system humming quietly in the background. The environmental systems are still active, she asked, surprised. Minimal maintenance mode. Thompson, the previously silent technician, finally spoke. These facilities were designed with remarkable redundancy. Multiple power sources, including a small radioisotope thermoelectric generator for critical systems. It could maintain basic life support and security functions for decades. A nuclear power source in my property, Rebecca asked, alarmed. Low output, heavily shielded, and perfectly safe, Peterson assured her. That's one of the components we'll be removing during decommissioning. In a small room off the main communications center, Rebecca discovered something unexpected. A complete library of operational manuals, emergency procedures, and what appeared to be classified documents in locked cabinets. These would have guided the station operators during a crisis, Frank explained, following her gaze. Step-by-step protocols for every conceivable scenario, from weather emergencies to full-scale nuclear exchange. Rebecca turned to Peterson. Who would have staffed this facility? You mentioned civilian contractors. Typically a team of 3 to 6 people with appropriate security clearances. Often locals with technical backgrounds who could maintain the cover business above while being ready to activate the facility when needed. And so Harold Jenkins was essentially a government operative. We preferred the term civil defense partner, Peterson corrected. Mr. Jenkins was a patriot who understood the importance of these preparations. He ran a legitimate business that provided valuable services to the community while standing ready to serve his country if the unthinkable happened. Rebecca's mind was reeling with the implications. And now I own all of this. The physical structure, yes, Peterson acknowledged. The operational equipment and any classified materials remain government property. That's what we're here to inventory and remove. As the technical team began examining the communications equipment, Rebecca pulled Margaret aside. What am I looking at in terms of value here? Not just the equipment they want to remove, but the facility itself. Margaret considered the question carefully. The bunker alone would cost over $1 million to construct today. Reinforced concrete, specialized ventilation, electromagnetic pulse shielding. These aren't standard construction features. Then there's the independent infrastructure, water power air filtration. Even decommissioned, this is an extraordinary asset. And they just forgot about it when the property went to auction. Bureaucratic oversight, most likely, Margaret replied. These facilities were managed under compartmentalized programs. When the Cold War ended, budgets were cut, personnel changed, records were archived. Something as small as a relay station in Pennsylvania could easily fall through the administrative cracks. Frank Mitchell approached them, his weathered face thoughtful. Miss Turner, if you don't mind an old communications specialist offering an observation. You've got something special here, not just historically but practically. This bunker was built to withstand almost anything: nuclear fallout, electromagnetic pulse, conventional attacks. The structural integrity alone is remarkable. What would you do with it if it were yours? Rebecca asked. Frank glanced toward Peterson, who was engaged with Thompson at the main console, then lowered his voice. I'd consider keeping as much of the original infrastructure as possible. The communications equipment they're concerned about, that's outdated now. But the life support systems, the shielding, the basic structure, that's still valuable. With some modernization, this could be an extraordinary space. For living, among other things, these facilities were designed for long-term human habitation under extreme conditions. With updates to the electrical and plumbing, there's no reason it couldn't be incorporated into your renovation plans. Rebecca studied the older man, sensing a potential ally. You sound like you've given this some thought. Frank smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. Let's just say I've always had a soft spot for these old stations. Spent enough time in them to appreciate their potential beyond their original purpose. Their conversation was interrupted by Peterson's approach. Mr. Mitchell, we need your expertise with the TACOMO interface protocols. As Frank rejoined the technical team, Rebecca wandered back to the main communications center, watching as they systematically documented each piece of equipment. The silent Thompson photographed serial numbers and made notes on a tablet, while Peterson supervised with the efficient detachment of a career bureaucrat. Something about their methodical work bothered Rebecca. They were treating this place as merely a collection of outdated technology to be cataloged and removed, not as the extraordinary historical artifact it truly was. This facility had stood ready for decades, a silent guardian against catastrophic possibilities that thankfully never materialized. In the small library room, Rebecca examined the locked cabinets more closely. Unlike the communications equipment being inventoried in the main room, these document storage units weren't receiving the same attention. A paper-era secrets perhaps deemed less critical than the hardware itself. One cabinet drawer was partially open, revealing the edge of a red binder marked Emergency Action Procedures, classified. Rebecca glanced toward the main room where the technical team remained absorbed in their work, then carefully slid the drawer open further. Inside were dozens of carefully organized manuals and procedural guides, each bearing classified markings and dated from the early 1980s. As she gently lifted the red binder, a folded blueprint fell from between its pages. Rebecca quickly retrieved it, unfolding it just enough to recognize what appeared to be a network diagram, lines connecting dozens of facilities like hers across the eastern United States, with annotations and codes that meant nothing to her untrained eye. She carefully refolded the blueprint and slipped it into her jacket pocket before closing the drawer. "Finding anything interesting?" Rebecca startled at Peterson's voice behind her. "Just trying to understand what all this was for," she said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "It's fascinating history." Peterson studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Indeed, history that shaped our world in ways most civilians never realized." He glanced at the cabinet she had been examining. "We'll need to remove those classified materials as well. Some information remains sensitive despite its age." "Of course," Rebecca agreed, maintaining a neutral expression. "I'm just trying to get a complete picture of what I've purchased." "Understandable, but I should emphasize that while you own the physical structure, any operational documentation or technical specifications remain government property." "Clearly," Rebecca acknowledged. "I'm more interested in the space itself and how I might repurpose it." Peterson seemed satisfied with this response. "Once decommissioning is complete, the facility will be yours to use as you see fit. We would request that you maintain discretion about its original purpose, but there are no legal restrictions on the structure itself." As they rejoined the others in the main communications center, Frank was explaining the function of a particular console to Margaret, his hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who had once operated this equipment daily. "This station could receive and authenticate emergency action messages directly from the National Command Authority," he was saying. "The presidential emergency action documents would have been stored in that safe." He pointed to a heavy combination safe built into the wall with specific instructions for local authorities in case of national emergency. "And Jenkins Auto Repair was chosen for its location?" Margaret asked. "Strategic positioning," Frank confirmed. "Close enough to Philadelphia to serve regional needs, but far enough from primary target zones to survive initial attacks. The building's construction provided natural cover, thick brick walls, multiple access points, legitimate reason for equipment deliveries, and unusual power usage." Rebecca looked around the facility with new appreciation. "It's remarkable how many of these were hidden across the country, with most people never knowing they existed." "That was the point," Peterson interjected. "The program's effectiveness depended on its secrecy. Even now, the full extent of the emergency network remains classified." A thought occurred to Rebecca. "Is this facility still connected to that network in any way, even if it's decommissioned?" Thompson and Peterson exchanged a quick glance that Rebecca didn't miss. "The active connections were severed years ago," Peterson said carefully. "But the physical infrastructure, the hardened communication lines, the antenna access points, those remain in place. They're inert without the proper equipment." Rebecca suspected there was more to it than Peterson was admitting, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she asked, "How long will the decommissioning process take?" "We should complete the inventory today," Peterson replied. "Actual removal of sensitive equipment will require specialized transport, which we can schedule for next week. The process should take no more than 2 to 3 days. And after that, the space is mine to renovate as I see fit. With standard building permits, yes, though I would recommend consulting with structural engineers experienced in underground construction before making any significant modifications. These facilities have unique requirements." As the technical team continued their work, Rebecca pulled Margaret aside again. "What do you think they're not telling me?" Margaret kept her voice low. "Several possibilities. This facility might have capabilities they haven't disclosed, or connections to other systems that remain active. The network these stations formed was deliberately redundant and compartmentalized. Not everyone knew the complete picture, even those with clearance. Should I be concerned? Cautious, not concerned, Margaret advised. You're in a strong legal position as the property owner, but government agencies have their own priorities, which may not align with yours. Their conversation was interrupted by Frank, who approached with a troubled expression. Everything all right? Rebecca asked. Frank glanced back at Peterson, who was engaged with Thompson at the main console. Ms. Turner, there's something you should know about these facilities. Something not in the official briefing. About them, what is it? In 1983, during the Able Archer NATO exercises, Soviet intelligence misinterpreted our operations as preparation for a first strike. We came closer to nuclear war than most people realize. Facilities like this one went to elevated alert status. I was serving at a similar station in Maryland when the emergency action messages started coming in. I've read about that incident, Margaret said. The Soviets misinterpreted a NATO command post exercise as preparation for an actual attack. Frank nodded grimly. What the history books don't tell you is how close we came to actual launch orders. These stations were fully activated. Authentication codes were distributed. We were hours, maybe minutes away from initiating the emergency broadcast system and implementing continuity of government protocols. Why are you telling me this? Rebecca asked. Because this facility wasn't just a communications relay. According to the equipment configuration I'm seeing, Eastern 057 had a special designation in the network. It was part of the TACOMO system, Take Charge and Move Out, designed to ensure command and control of nuclear forces, even if primary command centers were destroyed. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. There were nuclear launch capabilities here. Not launch control directly, Frank clarified, but authentication and relay functions for emergency action messages. This station could have been part of the command chain during a nuclear crisis. And they're only now removing this equipment. Budget priorities change. After the Cold War, many decommissioning projects were deferred, and some facilities were kept in standby status longer than officially acknowledged. Frank glanced at his watch. Look, I've probably said more than I should, but as the property owner, you deserve to know the full history of what you've purchased. Before Rebecca could respond, Peterson called from across the room. Mitchell, we need your input on the Bierger database access protocols. Frank gave Rebecca a meaningful look before rejoining the technical team. She was left to wonder what other secrets might be hidden in the facility she now owned, and what other purposes it might have served beyond those Peterson had disclosed. The inventory process continued through the afternoon with the technical team methodically documenting each piece of equipment. Rebecca observed, occasionally asking questions that revealed more about the facility's capabilities without directly challenging Peterson's official narrative. By late afternoon, Peterson announced they had completed the initial assessment. We'll prepare a detailed inventory report and removal schedule. As I mentioned, the actual decommissioning should begin next week. And in the meantime, Rebecca asked, the facility should remain secured. We'll reset the access codes to something you can use, but we request that you limit entry until the sensitive equipment has been removed. That seems reasonable, Rebecca agreed, though she had no intention of staying away from her own property. As they prepared to leave, Frank approached Rebecca one last time. Ms. Turner, it was a pleasure meeting you. If you have any questions about the facility's systems, the non-classified aspects, of course, I'd be happy to provide some guidance. Peterson has my contact information. I'd appreciate that, Rebecca said, sensing the offer was more than just professional courtesy. Once they had all returned to the surface and the bunker access was secured, Peterson provided Rebecca with new access codes for the control panel. These will operate the entry system. Again, we request discretion until decommissioning is complete. After Peterson and his team departed, only Margaret remained studying the mechanic shop with new appreciation. Quite the discovery you've made. More than I bargained for, Rebecca admitted. What do you make of Frank Mitchell's comments about the facility's special designation? If he's correct about it being part of the TACOMO network, this station was more significant than Peterson indicated. Those systems were critical links in the nuclear command structure. Which makes me wonder why it was allowed to slip through bureaucratic cracks and end up at a county auction. Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. That's the question, isn't it? Oversight seems unlikely for something of this sensitivity. Unless, unless what? Unless someone wanted it to appear that way. A facility with legitimate historical value, but also potential modern applications positioned to be discovered under seemingly innocent circumstances. Rebecca considered this disturbing possibility. You think my purchase was somehow part of a plan? I think coincidences are rare in matters involving national security and infrastructure, Margaret said carefully. The man bidding against you at the auction, did you get a good look at him? Not really. He wore sunglasses inside and kept to himself. And he dropped out just below your maximum budget. Rebecca felt a growing unease. You think the auction was manipulated? I think it's worth considering all possibilities. Margaret handed Rebecca a business card different from the one she had provided earlier. This one had only a phone number, no name or company. If you have concerns or questions, call this number directly, not the one on my official card. Before Rebecca could ask what that meant, Margaret was walking toward her car. Be careful with your new property, Miss Turner. Some relics of the Cold War never truly went dormant. Sad. Rebecca picked up Sophie from her friend's house late that afternoon, her mind still processing everything she had learned about the facility beneath their new home. Mom, did you finish the boring paperwork stuff? Can we go to our mechanic shop tomorrow? Sophie bounced into the car with the boundless energy of a 10-year-old. Yes to both questions, Rebecca said, managing a smile despite her preoccupation. In fact, I have some exciting news about our new home. What did they say we can build a rooftop garden because I've been designing one with solar panels and a rainwater collection system? Rebecca laughed momentarily, forgetting her concerns. Even better, it turns out our mechanic shop has a secret. Sophie's eyes widened. A real secret like buried treasure. Sort of. There's a special room hidden underneath the main floor. A very big room, actually, like an apartment below our building. You mean like a basement? More like, boom. Rebecca considered how to explain a Cold War bunker to a 10-year-old. More like a special shelter that was built a long time ago when people were worried about different kinds of emergencies. It has its own power and water systems and extra space we can use. Sophie processed this information with remarkable composure. So our mechanic shop has a secret underground lair. That's even cooler than I thought. Can I see it? Does it have hidden passages? Secret doors? It does have a hidden entrance, and yes, you can see it soon. There are some government people who need to remove old equipment first, but then we can start planning how to use the space. Government people, Sophie's expression turned suspicious. Like FBI agents. More like historians and technicians, Rebecca said, simplifying but considerably. The room was built during something called the Cold War, and it has historical value. As they drove home through the evening traffic, Rebecca debated how much to tell Sophie about the facility's true purpose. Her daughter was mature for her age, but explaining nuclear war contingency planning seemed unnecessarily frightening. For now, framing it as a historical curiosity seemed appropriate. Can I tell my friends about our secret underground room? Sophie asked. Not yet, sweetheart. The government people asked us to keep it private until they finish their work. Then we can decide who to tell. Sophie nodded with unexpected seriousness. I understand. Secret missions require operational security. Rebecca glanced at her daughter, amused. Where did you learn that phrase? History Channel documentary about espionage. Ms. Nelson lets us watch educational videos during lunch sometimes. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Rebecca carefully unfolded the blueprint she had taken from the bunker. Under proper lighting, she could now see it was indeed a network diagram showing interconnections between dozens of facilities across the eastern United States. Each node was identified by a code number with Eastern 057, her facility highlighted with the special designation Tacoma Secondary Relay Point Alpha. Lines connected it to other nodes, forming a complex web that seemed to converge at several major hubs. Annotations indicated transmission protocols, authentication procedures, and contingency routing options. Most of the technical details meant nothing to Rebecca, but the scale and complexity of the network was impressive. This wasn't just a local communications bunker. It was part of a vast integrated system designed to survive apocalyptic conditions and maintain government control through the worst imaginable crisis. Rebecca photographed the blueprint carefully, then secured it in a waterproof document sleeve. Whatever its significance, this piece of Cold War history might prove valuable in her negotiations with Peterson and his agency. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Auction records public. Others know what you have. Secure your property. M. Margaret's warning sent a new wave of concern through Rebecca. If her property's history was discoverable through public records, others besides the government might be interested in its secrets: collectors, historians, or people with less benign intentions. She immediately pulled up the security camera app she had installed at the mechanic shop after purchasing it, a basic precaution for an unoccupied property. The grainy night vision feed showed the building's exterior apparently undisturbed. But as she watched, a dark sedan drove slowly past its headlights off before continuing down the street. It might be nothing, a lost driver or a late-night delivery. But combined with Margaret's warning, it heightened Rebecca's sense that her simple housing solution had evolved into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous. She needed to secure her property not just for its value, but for the safety of herself and Sophie. Tomorrow she would install better security measures at the mechanic shop, and she would begin formulating a strategy for navigating the competing interests surrounding her unexpected acquisition. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Rebecca found herself wondering about Harold Jenkins, the original owner of the property. What had it been like for him running a legitimate business while standing ready to serve as a critical communication link during nuclear Armageddon? Had he felt the weight of that responsibility every day as he changed oil and fixed transmissions? Had his customers ever suspected the true purpose of the building, where they brought their cars for repair? And what would he think of her plans to transform his life's work into a home for a struggling single mother and her violin-playing daughter? The next morning brought heavy rain, providing perfect cover for Rebecca's plans. After dropping Sophie at school, she drove to a home improvement store and purchased upgraded security equipment, motion-activated lights, additional cameras, and a more sophisticated electronic lock for the main entrance. At the mechanic shop, she worked efficiently, installing the new security measures while maintaining a watchful eye for any unusual vehicles or visitors. The rain drummed steadily on the metal roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop to her work. By mid-morning, she had substantially improved the building's security. The new cameras covered all approaches with alerts set to her phone. The reinforced locks would make casual intrusion difficult. It wasn't impenetrable, but it would deter most unwanted visitors and alert her to any serious attempts at entry. With the immediate security concerns addressed, Rebecca turned her attention to the bunker access. Using the codes Peterson had provided, she activated the control panel and watched as the hydraulic lift slid aside to reveal the hatch. The mechanical precision of the system was impressive, especially considering its age. Descending the staircase alone without the government team present gave Rebecca a different perspective on the facility. The emergency lighting activated automatically, casting the bunker in the same pale blue glow she had experienced yesterday. But now, without the distraction of Peterson's team, she could examine the space more carefully, with an eye toward its potential rather than its history. The main communications center, despite its specialized equipment, was essentially an open-concept workspace, approximately 800 square feet of uninterrupted floor space. Once the government removed their equipment, it could be transformed into an extraordinary living area, with the high ceiling and built-in wall systems providing a distinctive industrial aesthetic. The sleeping quarters, with their 6 bunks and efficient storage systems, could be easily converted into bedrooms. The galley kitchen, while small, had the basic infrastructure for modern appliances. The air filtration system hummed quietly, maintaining a comfortable temperature and humidity level without external power, a remarkable feat of engineering. Most impressive was the structural integrity of the space. The walls were reinforced concrete designed to withstand catastrophic conditions above ground. The facility had its own water supply, a deep well with purification systems and independent electrical infrastructure, including backup generators and power storage. With modern updates to the electrical and plumbing systems, this underground space could become a unique and self-sufficient living environment, a secure sanctuary beneath their mechanic shop home. Rebecca began taking detailed measurements and photographs, planning how they might integrate the bunker into their renovation. Sophie's bedroom could remain in the converted office space above ground, with the main living areas in the former garage. The bunker could serve as an extension, perhaps a music studio, for Sophie, where sound wouldn't disturb neighbors, and a home office for Rebecca when she secured employment again. As she explored, Rebecca noticed something she had missed during yesterday's tour, a small door at the back of the storage area partially concealed behind shelving units. It had no obvious locking mechanism, just a simple handle. Curious, she moved the shelving aside and opened the door, revealing a narrow tunnel extending into darkness. The emergency lighting didn't continue into this passage. Using her phone's flashlight, Rebecca peered down the concrete corridor, which appeared to extend approximately 50 feet before turning sharply. This wasn't on Margaret's blueprints. An escape tunnel, perhaps? Or a connection to other infrastructure? Rebecca hesitated, then decided against exploring further without proper lighting and possibly backup. Whatever lay beyond that turn, it had not been part of Peterson's official disclosure, which made it all the more intriguing. She carefully closed the door and replaced the shelving unit in its original position. This discovery would remain her secret for now, a potential advantage in her ongoing negotiations with Peterson's agency. Returning to the main communications center, Rebecca noticed the red telephone Frank had pointed out yesterday, the direct line to FEMA regional headquarters. Unlike most of the equipment, it wasn't marked for removal in the inventory tags Peterson's team had placed. On an impulse, she lifted the receiver, expecting silence from a long disconnected line. To her shock, there was a dial tone, steady and clear. Rebecca quickly replaced the receiver, heart pounding. An active government line in her property decades after the facility's supposed decommissioning. This contradicted Peterson's assertion that all connections had been severed years ago. What else had he misrepresented about the bunker's current status? Her exploration was interrupted by an alert from her phone motion detected at the main entrance. The security camera feed showed a figure in a raincoat approaching the mechanic's shop door, face obscured by an umbrella. Rebecca quickly exited the bunker, securing the hatch and activating the hydraulic lift to conceal the entrance. By the time a knock came at the door, she was in the main garage area, the bunker access completely hidden. Through the security camera feed, she could now see that her visitor was Frank Mitchell, the elderly communications specialist from Peterson's team. He stood patiently in the rain, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as if concerned about being followed. Rebecca opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Mitchell, I wasn't expecting you." "Ms. Turner," Frank said, his voice low, "I apologize for the unannounced visit. May I come in? What I have to share shouldn't be discussed outside." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside to allow him entry. Despite her caution, something about the older man's demeanor inspired trust. Once inside, Frank removed his wet raincoat and glanced around the garage area. "You've installed security measures. Good, you'll need them." "What's going on, Mr. Mitchell?" Frank's weathered face was grave. "After yesterday's inspection, I had some concerns about what you were and weren't being told. I've spent my life in government service, Miss Turner. I believe in what these facilities represented, our nation's determination to survive even the worst scenarios. But I also believe in truth, especially when it affects private citizens." "Truth about what?" "About Eastern R057, your facility. It wasn't just any relay station. According to the configuration I observed, it was designated as a TACOMO secondary relay point alpha. That's a specific classification for nodes that could function as backup authentication points for nuclear command and control." Rebecca felt a chill despite the ambient temperature. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means your facility had capabilities beyond standard communications relay. In a crisis scenario where primary command centers were compromised, stations like this could authenticate and relay emergency action messages, including potentially nuclear launch orders." "And this is what Peterson didn't tell." Among other things." Frank looked around cautiously before continuing. "There's more. The decommissioning Peterson describes selectively removing certain equipment while leaving the facility largely intact. That's not standard procedure for TACOMO nodes. Typically, these facilities were either kept in standby status with minimal equipment removal or completely decommissioned with all sensitive systems removed." "So what are they really doing?" "I believe they're implementing what we used to call a selective downgrade, removing the most obviously classified systems while preserving the facility's core capabilities for potential reactivation." "Why would they do that with a Cold War relic?" Frank's expression was solemn. "Because some capabilities never become obsolete, Ms. Turner. The ability to maintain secure communications during a national emergency is as valuable today as it was 40 years ago." And your facility has features that would be prohibitively expensive to replicate today: the hardened structure, the electromagnetic pulse shielding, the independent infrastructure. Rebecca processed this information. Are you saying they want to keep using my property for government purposes? Not actively, perhaps, but as a contingency, a resource they could reactivate if needed. The Cold War may be over, but the need for resilient communication networks remains. Frank hesitated. There's something else you should know. I discovered that the secure line to the FEMA regional headquarters is still active. I know, I checked it earlier. Frank's eyebrows rose. You did? That was risky. Active connections are monitored. I didn't speak into it, just checked for a dial tone. Even so, that interaction would have registered somewhere, so, which means they know you've been exploring independently. Frank shook his head. Be careful, Ms. Turner. These systems were designed with multiple layers of security and monitoring capabilities. Why are you telling me all this? Aren't you risking your position? Frank smiled sadly. I'm 71 years old, Ms. Turner. Retired from government service with a full pension. I consult occasionally because they still need people who understand the old systems. But my primary loyalty now is to the truth and to ensuring that ordinary citizens aren't caught in bureaucratic webs they don't understand. He reached into his pocket and removed a small notebook. I've written down some information that might be useful, technical details about your facility's systems that weren't included in the official inventory. Features you should be aware of as the property owner. Rebecca accepted the notebook, flipping through pages of handwritten notes and diagrams. Thank you. This is extremely helpful. And there's also contact information for people you can trust if you have concerns about the decommissioning process. Former colleagues who understand these systems and want to simply defer to current agency priorities. As Frank prepared to leave, he paused at the door. One last thing, Ms. Turner. The tunnel at the back of the storage area, it connects to the municipal storm drain system. It was designed as an emergency exit in case the main access was compromised. The access code for the external door is in my notes. Rebecca stared at him. How did you know I found that? Because I would have found it too in your position. Frank smiled knowingly. That tunnel isn't on the official blueprints. It was added during construction as a security enhancement. Only station personnel with the highest clearance knew about it. And Peterson, I doubt he's aware. He's an administrator, not a field operative. His knowledge is limited to what's in the current documentation. Frank donned his raincoat. Be judicious about what you reveal. Information is your strongest asset in this situation. After Frank departed, Rebecca sat in the quiet mechanic shop processing everything she had learned. The facility beneath her property was far more significant than Peterson had acknowledged, a node in the nation's nuclear command structure, with capabilities that apparently retain value even decades after the Cold War's end. This changed her negotiating position considerably. If the government wanted to preserve access to or control of certain aspects of the facility, they would need her cooperation as the legal property owner. That leverage could potentially be translated into assistance with her renovation plans, financial support, expedited permits, technical expertise. But it also introduced new complications and potential risks. If others knew about the facility's significance, from Cold War historians to technology collectors to foreign interests, her property might attract unwanted attention. Margaret's warning about the auction records being public took on new meaning. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming against the roof of the mechanic shop that had become far more than the desperate housing solution she had initially sought. Rebecca opened Frank's notebook and began studying the technical details of the facility that was now hers, determined to understand its secrets and potential before proceeding with any agreements or renovations. As she read, one thing became increasingly clear. The abandoned mechanic shop she had purchased for $800 at a county auction might be the most valuable property in Oak Ridge, not despite its Cold War history, but because of it. The following days brought a flurry of activity as Rebecca balanced preparing for their move with learning everything she could about her unique property. She spent hours researching Cold War communication systems, consulting Frank's notes, and developing a comprehensive understanding of the bunker's capabilities. By the time Peterson's team was scheduled to begin the decommissioning process, Rebecca had formulated a strategy, one that acknowledged the government's security concerns while asserting her rights as the property owner. When Peterson arrived with his technical team in a larger transport vehicle for removing equipment, Rebecca met him with confident professionalism. "Before you begin," she said, "I'd like to discuss some modifications to our arrangement." Peterson's expression tightened slightly. "The decommissioning plan has already been approved at the appropriate levels, Miss Turner." "I understand. But as the legal owner of this property, I have some concerns and requests that need to be addressed." Rebecca maintained steady eye contact, particularly regarding the TACAMO designation of this facility and its potential for reactivation under certain circumstances. Peterson's careful composure faltered momentarily. "Where did you hear that term in connection with this facility?" "From multiple sources," Rebecca replied vaguely, "including documentation I've discovered on the property. The point is this facility is more significant than you initially represented, which changes the nature of our discussion." She presented Peterson with a document she had prepared a proposed amendment to their original agreement. "I'm willing to cooperate fully with the removal of truly sensitive equipment and to maintain appropriate discretion about the facility's history. In exchange, I'm requesting technical assistance with integrating the remaining infrastructure into my renovation plans, expedited permits for the necessary modifications, and a formal agreement regarding any future government interest in the property." Peterson studied the document with growing discomfort. "This goes beyond my immediate authority." "Then I suggest you consult with those who have the appropriate authority. Because until we have a comprehensive agreement that acknowledges the true nature of this facility, I'm not comfortable proceeding with selective equipment removal." Their standoff was interrupted by Thompson, who approached with obvious urgency. "Sir, we've received a priority communication from headquarters. There's a situation developing that requires immediate attention." Peterson stepped aside to confer with his team, leaving Rebecca to wait in the mechanic shop's office area. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of their conversation, something about unauthorized access attempts and pattern recognition alerts. When Peterson returned, his demeanor had shifted from bureaucratic to urgently professional. "Ms. Turner, we need to temporarily postpone the decommissioning process. A security situation has developed that requires our immediate attention." "What kind of security situation, CEO?" Peterson hesitated, then seemed to make a calculation about how much to reveal. "We've detected unusual access attempts targeting several former emergency network facilities, including this one. Possibly foreign intelligence gathering, possibly domestic actors with concerning motivations. Either way, it represents a security vulnerability we need to address before proceeding. Someone's trying to hack into the bunker's systems." In simplified terms, yes. The emergency network was designed with multiple layers of security, but some components have become vulnerable due to technological evolution. We need to implement additional safeguards before removing any equipment. Rebecca processed this unexpected development. "Is my property or my daughter in any danger?" "Not immediately, no. These are electronic intrusion attempts, not physical. But as a precaution, we'll be enhancing security measures around the facility and providing temporary monitoring until the situation is resolved." As Peterson's team prepared to depart, leaving all equipment in place rather than beginning the planned removal, he turned to Rebecca with unexpected seriousness. "Ms. Turner, I've forwarded your proposed amendments to my superiors. Given the current circumstances, I suspect you'll receive a more receptive response than you might have otherwise. Our priorities have shifted somewhat in light of these security concerns." "Meaning why?" "Meaning that having a cooperative property owner who understands the significance of this facility has suddenly become more valuable to us than simplifying our inventory sheets." Peterson handed her a business card with a different contact number. "If you notice anything unusual, vehicles monitoring the property, unidentified visitors' equipment, activating without your input, call this number immediately. It's a direct line to our security response team." After Peterson and his people departed, Rebecca found herself alone in the mechanic shop processing this significant shift in dynamics. What had begun as a routine government effort to reclaim classified equipment had evolved into an active security concern, one that potentially enhanced her negotiating position while introducing new complexities. She descended into the bunker once more, seeing the communications equipment with new eyes. These weren't just historical artifacts of a bygone era. They were components of a system that apparently retained enough strategic value to attract unauthorized access attempts decades after their supposed obsolescence. The red telephone on the central console, the one connected to FEMA headquarters, seemed to embody this strange intersection of past and present, a Cold War relic that maintained active connections to modern emergency management systems, a piece of history that refused to become merely historical. As Rebecca examined the main communications console more carefully, she noticed something she had overlooked before: a small status indicator labeled Network Integrity Monitoring that was illuminated with a steady green light. According to Frank's notes, this indicated that the facility's intrusion detection systems were actively functioning, monitoring for unauthorized access attempts like those Peterson had described. This bunker wasn't dormant at all. It remained a living system, quietly maintaining its vigilance decades after the threats it was designed to counter had evolved into new forms. Rebecca's phone chimed with a text message from Margaret. Development's government activity increased at several former network nodes. She responded, decommissioning postponed, security concerns, unauthorized access attempts. Margaret's reply came quickly. Expected, historical value increasing, leverage opportunity, proceed carefully. As Rebecca climbed the stairs back to the surface, securing the bunker access behind her, she felt a strange sense of responsibility settling over her. She had purchased this property out of desperate necessity, a last-ditch effort to provide shelter for herself and Sophie. Now she found herself the custodian of a piece of Cold War history that apparently retained national security relevance. The rain had finally stopped and weak sunlight filtered through the mechanic shop's dirty windows. In a few hours, she would pick up Sophie from school, and life would continue with its ordinary rhythms: homework, violin practice, dinner preparations. But beneath these normal routines, Rebecca now carried knowledge that few civilians possessed: an understanding of a hidden infrastructure that had once stood ready to preserve government function through the unthinkable horror of nuclear war, and that still maintained connections to systems guarding against modern threats. As she locked the mechanic shop and walked to her car, Rebecca noticed a dark sedan parked across the street, similar to the one she had observed on her security camera. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see who might be watching from inside. Government surveillance, perhaps implementing the enhanced security Peterson had mentioned, or someone else with interest in the forgotten node of the emergency network, now legally owned by a single mother with an underwater mortgage and dwindling savings. Either way, Rebecca's impulsive bid at a county auction had drawn her into a world of shadows and secrets she was only beginning to understand. A world where an abandoned mechanic shop in a small Pennsylvania town could become the focus of covert attention from multiple quarters. As she drove away, Rebecca glanced in her rearview mirror. The sedan remained in place, a silent reminder that her newfound leverage came with its own complications and potential dangers. The simple quest for affordable housing had evolved into something far more complex: a high-stakes negotiation involving national security infrastructure, Cold War legacies, and competing interests that extended far beyond the borders of Oak Ridge. And somewhere in the midst of these converging forces, Rebecca needed to create a stable home for her daughter, transforming a mechanic shop with an apocalypse bunker into a place where a 10-year-old violinist could thrive. 1 week after Peterson's team postponed the decommissioning process, Rebecca sat in Madeline's cafe with Margaret Wilson, discussing the remarkable shift in their negotiations with the government. "They've accepted every amendment I proposed," Rebecca said, sliding a document across the table. "Technical assistance with renovation, expedited permits, even a substantial historical preservation grant that essentially covers most of my conversion costs." Margaret reviewed the agreement with professional scrutiny. Impressive leverage. They must be genuinely concerned about these security breaches. "Frank Mitchell has been feeding me updates. Apparently, several former emergency network nodes have experienced sophisticated intrusion attempts. Digital archaeology, he called it, someone methodically mapping the remnants of the Cold War communication infrastructure. Foreign intelligence. That's their primary concern, though Frank says there's debate about whether it's state-sponsored or private collectors. The Cold War left behind valuable technological artifacts." Margaret handed the document back. "Have they identified who was bidding against you at the auction?" "Not conclusively, but Peterson's team is investigating auction records for several properties with similar historical features. They believe someone has been systematically acquiring these locations." Outside the cafe window, Oak Ridge's Main Street bustled with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. A utility truck was performing work on telephone poles while municipal workers inspected manholes along the street. The ordinary scene carried new implications for Rebecca, who now recognized such activities might conceal government surveillance or security enhancements. They're establishing a perimeter, Margaret observed following Rebecca's gaze. Standard protocol when securing sensitive infrastructure. All this for a decommissioned bunker. For a node in a network they apparently still value, Margaret corrected. The physical infrastructure of these facilities, the hardened communication lines, the EMP shielding the secure access protocols, would be prohibitively expensive to replicate today. Sometimes old technology provides security advantages precisely because it's disconnected from modern vulnerabilities. Rebecca sipped her coffee, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. I just wanted affordable housing. Now I'm negotiating with defense agencies and discussing Cold War infrastructure. Life rarely follows our intended blueprints, Margaret said with a wry smile. Speaking of which, how are your renovation plans progressing? Remarkably well, thanks to the government's sudden cooperation. We're converting the main garage into an open-concept living space with Sophie's bedroom and music studio in the former office area. The bunker will become additional living space, a secure home office for me, and a weather-independent practice room for Sophie. When do you move in? Basic renovations should be complete within 3 weeks. We'll live in the above-ground portion while finishing the bunker conversion. Rebecca hesitated, though I'm still debating how much to tell Sophie about the facility's original purpose. Children often handle historical truths better than we expect, Margaret observed, especially when framed appropriately. Their conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's phone, a security alert from the mechanic shop. The camera feed showed a delivery truck pulling up outside the building. 2 workers in coveralls began unloading what appeared to be construction materials. The government contractors, Rebecca explained, they're reinforcing the physical security measures as part of our agreement. New doors, upgraded locks, surveillance countermeasures. Margaret studied the feed with professional interest. Military-grade security for a private residence. Your daughter will be growing up in one of the most secure homes in Pennsylvania. That's both reassuring and slightly disturbing. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Margaret handed Rebecca a small USB drive. Historical context for your unique home. Declassified documents about the emergency network and similar programs. If you're going to be living above a piece of Cold War history, you should understand its place in the larger strategic landscape. Rebecca pocketed the drive. Thank you for everything. You've handled this situation with remarkable poise, Ms. Turner. From desperate homebuyer to national security negotiator in a matter of weeks. Margaret's expression turned serious. But remain vigilant. Not everyone interested in your property has governmental oversight or ethical constraints. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Rebecca inserted Margaret's USB drive into her laptop. The files contained a comprehensive overview of various Cold War continuity of government programs, the infrastructure created to ensure national leadership could survive and function even after a nuclear attack. The emergency network had been just one component of this vast hidden system, a communications grid designed to maintain command and control capabilities when conventional infrastructure was destroyed. According to the documents, hundreds of nodes like Rebecca's had been constructed across the country, disguised as ordinary businesses or municipal facilities. Most fascinating were the declassified photographs showing similar facilities during their construction and operation, ordinary-looking buildings with extraordinary secrets beneath them. Service stations in Kansas, dental offices in Oregon, small manufacturing plants in Georgia, all concealing hardened communication bunkers staffed by civilians with security clearances. One document particularly caught Rebecca's attention, a 1982 Defense Department assessment titled Civilian Infrastructure Integration Advantages and Vulnerabilities. The report analyzed the strategic benefits of embedding critical communication nodes within civilian structures, noting that such facilities were, again, less vulnerable to Soviet targeting than obvious military installations, more sustainable through integration with functioning civilian economies, and more resilient through local operator knowledge and commitment. The civilian operators of these facilities bring unique advantages, genuine cover identities, intimate knowledge of local conditions, and personal investment in their communities that transcend standard military duty. The assessment painted Harold Jenkins and others like him not as government operatives, but as patriots who had volunteered to serve as guardians of last resort ordinary citizens who would become crucial links in the continuity of government chain if the unthinkable occurred. Rebecca found herself developing a strange respect for the mechanic whose property she had purchased. He had maintained both his business and his secret responsibility for years, ready to transform from auto repairman to essential communication link at a moment's notice. As she continued reading, Rebecca discovered something unexpected, a reference to network reactivation protocols established in 2002. According to this document, certain emergency network nodes had been selectively reintegrated into Homeland Security systems following the September 11th attacks, providing redundant communication capabilities for emergency response coordination. Had Eastern 0057, her bunker, been among those reactivated, that would explain the active telephone line and monitoring systems she had discovered. Her research was interrupted by another security alert on her phone. The exterior camera at the mechanic shop showed a figure examining the building from across the street, not one of the government contractors, but someone in civilian clothes photographing the property with a professional camera equipped with a long lens. Rebecca immediately called the security response number Peterson had provided. "This is Rebecca Turner. There's someone surveilling my property on Oak Street." The response was immediate and professional. "We have your location. Security team is 2 minutes out. Please do not approach the individual." Within minutes, the camera feed showed a black SUV pulling up near the mechanic shop. Two individuals in plain clothes approached the photographer, who quickly departed after a brief conversation. One of the security team members then looked directly at Rebecca's camera and gave a subtle thumbs-up signal. Her phone rang moments later. "Ms. Turner, Agent Delgado, Defense Security Service." The individual was a known intelligence collector, someone who specializes in identifying historically significant properties for private collectors. He's been documented at 3 other former network facilities in the past month. Was he connected to the electronic intrusion attempts? We believe so, yes. They're establishing physical surveillance before attempting more direct approaches. Your security system performed exactly as intended. After the call ended, Rebecca sat in her quiet apartment, the reality of her situation settling in with new clarity. The mechanical shop wasn't just a fixer-upper with an interesting historical feature, it was becoming an active focal point for multiple interests, some potentially hostile. The government's willingness to provide enhanced security and renovation assistance suddenly seemed less like generous cooperation and more like pragmatic necessity. They needed her property secure, and her cooperation ensured that security. As she finally prepared for bed, Rebecca found herself wondering if Harold Jenkins had experienced similar moments, ordinary evenings transformed by the extraordinary responsibility of safeguarding national security infrastructure disguised as a simple auto repair shop. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of renovation activity. The government contractors worked with remarkable efficiency, transforming the mechanic shop's main level into a functional living space while simultaneously enhancing its security features. The large garage doors were replaced with reinforced walls featuring energy-efficient windows, though the industrial aesthetic was carefully preserved. The office area was converted into a bedroom for Sophie, with custom-built storage systems and a dedicated practice area for her violin. The break room became a modern kitchen, its commercial-grade appliances a significant upgrade from their apartment. Throughout the renovation, Peterson's technical team worked in parallel on the bunker level, removing the most sensitive communication equipment while preserving the basic infrastructure. As promised, they maintained the independent power systems in air filtration and water supply that made the underground facility self-sufficient. Most remarkably, they integrated these Cold War systems with modern technology, updating the electrical infrastructure to support contemporary needs while preserving the robust security features of the original design. By the end of the 3rd week, the mechanic shop had been transformed into a unique living space that maintained its industrial character while providing all the comforts of a modern home. The bunker level remained partially under construction, but the main living areas were ready for occupancy. Throughout this process, Rebecca maintained careful boundaries around her interactions with the various government representatives working on the property. She was cooperative but vigilant, reviewing every modification to ensure it served her family's needs while accommodating legitimate security concerns. Frank Mitchell visited regularly, ostensibly to consult on the communication infrastructure. but increasingly serving as an informal liaison between Rebecca and the various agencies involved. His straight-talking approach and genuine concern for her situation made him a trusted ally in navigating the complex dynamics surrounding her property. They're installing the final security systems today, Frank explained during his latest visit, passive monitoring equipment that will alert the response team to any unauthorized access attempts, physical or electronic. And then we'll have our privacy back, Rebecca asked. As much as possible given the circumstances, the monitoring is focused on external threats, not your daily activities. Frank hesitated. There is one additional measure they're proposing: a secure communication line for your personal use. Direct access to the response team if you notice anything concerning. A panic button, more like a dedicated phone with enhanced encryption. Standard procedure for civilian facilities with strategic significance. Rebecca considered this. Will it be obvious? I don't want Sophie worried about emergency communication systems in her home. It can be disguised as a regular landline. Only you would know its actual capabilities. As they finalized these arrangements, Sophie burst into the mechanic shop returning from school with her violin case in boundless enthusiasm. Mr. Mitchell, did you see they installed my starlights in my ceiling and the sound panels that look like clouds? It's like a music sky in my room. Frank smiled warmly at the 10-year-old. I did see that. Very impressive acoustics for a young musician. Mom says we can move in this weekend. I've already packed all my important stuff. Did you know I'm going to have the biggest bedroom I've ever had and no neighbors banging on walls when I practice? Sophie's excitement was infectious, momentarily lightening the serious atmosphere. Your mom has created something special here, Frank agreed. A very unique home. After Frank departed, Sophie explored the renovated space with Rebecca marveling at each completed feature. The contractors had taken special care with her requests, creating a bedroom that supported her musical development while maintaining the whimsical elements appropriate for a 10-year-old. Mom, when can I see the underground part again? You said it would be my storm-safe practice room. Rebecca had shown Sophie the bunker once during renovation, carefully framing it as a special shelter without explaining its Cold War purpose. Soon, they're still finishing the updates to make it comfortable. Maybe next week. I told Ms. Nelson our house has a special storm shelter, and she said those were common during something called the Cold War. Is that what our underground room is from? Rebecca shouldn't have been surprised by her daughter's perceptiveness, but it still caught her off guard. Yes, it is. It was built a long time ago when people were worried about different kinds of emergencies. Like nuclear war, Sophie asked matter-of-factly. We learned about that in history class, how everyone was scared of bombs and built special shelters. Yes, that's essentially it. Rebecca decided honesty was the best approach. The room underneath our house was built during that time as a special communication center in case of emergencies. Now it's just an interesting part of history that we get to use as extra space in our home. Sophie considered this with surprising maturity. So our house helped keep people safe during scary times. That's pretty cool. It's like we're living in a history museum, but one we can actually use. That's a wonderful way to think about it, Rebecca agreed, relieved by her daughter's healthy perspective. As they continued exploring their soon-to-be home, Rebecca realized that Sophie's framing was perfect. They were indeed custodians of a historical artifact, one that had served a vital purpose during a tense chapter of American history. Now they would write its next chapter, transforming a Cold War communication node into a warm, secure home for a new generation. Moving day arrived with perfect fall weather, crisp air, and golden sunlight that made the mechanic shop's freshly cleaned windows gleam. Rebecca and Sophie had packed their modest belongings with care, selecting what would transition to their new life and what could be donated or discarded. As they carried the first boxes into the converted garage space, Sophie's violin teacher arrived unexpectedly carrying a housewarming gift. Ms. Nelson, what are you doing here? Sophie exclaimed. I wanted to see this amazing new home you've been describing, the older woman replied with a warm smile, and to bring you something for your music room. She presented a beautifully framed vintage sheet music collection, Vivaldi's Four Seasons, with historical annotations. This is perfect for my practice wall. Sophie immediately began planning where it would hang. While Sophie arranged her music materials in her new bedroom, Ms. Nelson spoke quietly with Rebecca. This is a remarkable transformation. From what Sophie described, I expected something much more rudimentary. We had unexpected assistance with the renovation, Rebecca explained carefully. A historical preservation grant made it possible to do much more than I initially planned. Ms. Nelson nodded, though her expression suggested curiosity about what remained unsaid. Sophie mentioned a special room underground, a bomb shelter of some kind. A civil defense shelter from the Cold War era, Rebecca confirmed, sticking to the simplified explanation. It's being converted into additional living space. The previous owner participated in some government preparedness programs back in the 1980s. Fascinating history. This area had several civil defense initiatives during that period. The manufacturing plant that originally established Oak Ridge produced communication equipment for military applications before transitioning to civilian production. Well, Rebecca hadn't known this specific detail about the town's history. You seem well informed about Cold War infrastructure. My late husband worked in civil engineering with government contracts. He helped design some of the reinforcement systems for public buildings during that era. Ms. Nelson smiled gently. Many of us from that generation played our small parts in preparations we hoped would never be necessary. This casual revelation suggested that knowledge of the emergency network might be more widespread among certain segments of the local population than Peterson's team had acknowledged. Perhaps in a town like Oak Ridge, with its historical connections to defense manufacturing, such secrets weren't entirely secret among the older residents. After Ms. Nelson departed, the moving process continued smoothly. By evening, their essential belongings were arranged in the new space, transforming the recently renovated rooms into a home. Sophie's bedroom looked particularly settled, her personality immediately stamping itself on the space through carefully arranged books, music stands, and the star-pattern lights that created a gentle glow across the ceiling. As Rebecca prepared their first dinner in the new kitchen, she was struck by the remarkable contrast between their desperate situation just weeks ago and their current circumstances. The threat of homelessness had driven her to a county auction where a desperate bid had somehow led to this extraordinary outcome, a unique home with historical significance, government security enhancements, and technological capabilities far beyond what she could have afforded through conventional means. Their first night in the converted mechanic shop passed peacefully. The thick brick walls blocked most external sounds, creating a quieter environment than their apartment had ever provided. The updated heating system maintained perfect temperature control despite the autumn chill outside. Even the internet connection, enhanced as part of the security infrastructure, performed flawlessly as Sophie video called friends to show off her new bedroom. It felt surreal, this comfortable domestic scene playing out above a Cold War bunker designed to maintain government communications through a nuclear apocalypse. After Sophie went to bed, Rebecca descended to the bunker level for a final security check. The renovation work here remained partially complete, with the main communications room now emptied of most original equipment and prepared for conversion into additional living space. The sleeping quarters had been preserved, but updated with modern amenities, creating comfortable extra bedrooms. The galley kitchen had been integrated with their main kitchen systems while maintaining its independent functionality. Most importantly, the core infrastructure, the systems that made the bunker self-sufficient, had been carefully preserved and updated. The independent water supply, air filtration, and power systems remained fully operational, providing redundancy for essential services and remarkable self-sufficiency. As Rebecca completed her inspection, she noticed the secure communication line Frank had mentioned, now installed and disguised as an ordinary wall phone near the staircase. Its only distinguishing feature was a small red button beneath the standard keypad, presumably the direct connection to the security response team. She was about to return upstairs when the security phone rang, a sound so unexpected in the quiet bunker that it made her jump. After a moment's hesitation, Rebecca answered. "Hello. Ms. Turner, this is Robert Peterson. I apologize for the late call, but I wanted to personally confirm that the security systems are functioning correctly. Our monitoring station received confirmation that you've accessed the lower level." Rebecca glanced around, suddenly aware of invisible surveillance systems. "Yes, just doing a final check before bed. Is that going to happen every time I come down here?" "No, not at all. The system will learn normal patterns of access. This initial period requires calibration to distinguish between routine activities and potential security concerns." "I see." Rebecca wasn't entirely comfortable with this level of monitoring, despite the security benefits. How long will this calibration period last? Approximately 1 week. After that, the system will only generate alerts for truly anomalous activities. Peterson's tone shifted slightly. There's another matter I wanted to discuss. We've identified the individual who bid against you at the auction. Rebecca's attention sharpened. Who was it? A representative for a private collector. Someone who specializes in Cold War technology and infrastructure. We believe he's connected to the surveillance attempts at your property and similar facilities. His employer has acquired 2 other former emergency network locations in the past 3 years. For what purpose? That remains unclear. Possibly legitimate historical interest, possibly something more concerning. We're continuing to investigate. Peterson paused. In the meantime, the security enhancements at your property have been escalated to level 2 protocols more comprehensive than originally planned given this development. Is my daughter in danger? We have no indication of any direct threat. These appear to be intelligence gathering and activities focused on the technology and infrastructure, not the current occupants. Nevertheless, we're taking appropriate precautions. After ending the call, Rebecca remained in the bunker, processing this new information. The collector Peterson described sounded like a Cold War enthusiast with unusual resources, someone willing to pay premium prices for authentic relics of that era. But the government's enhanced security response suggested they feared something more significant than historical artifact hunting. As she finally returned upstairs, checking on Sophie sleeping peacefully in her new bedroom, Rebecca reflected on the strange responsibility she had acquired along with this property. She wasn't just a homeowner, but the custodian of a facility that apparently retained enough strategic value to warrant sophisticated security protocols and government concern decades after its creation. The following weeks brought a gradual adjustment to their new reality. The renovation of the bunker level continued transforming the Cold War command center into functional modern space while preserving its historical features. Sophie established a practice routine in her special music room, underground, delighted with the perfect acoustics the concrete walls provided. Rebecca's professional situation improved unexpectedly when one of her job applications received an enthusiastic response. A technology consulting firm specializing in infrastructure security was impressed by her engineering background, and she suspected by a recommendation from someone in Peterson's department. The position offered flexible remote work options, allowing her to establish a home office in the converted bunker's former communications center. Their financial stability increased further when the historical preservation grant promised in their agreement with the government was supplemented by an additional stipend for ongoing facility maintenance, essentially a payment for Rebecca's cooperation in maintaining the security of the former emergency network node. This combination of income sources transformed their financial outlook, providing stability that had seemed impossible when facing eviction just months earlier. Sophie's violin lessons continued without interruption, and she successfully auditioned for the regional youth orchestra, an achievement celebrated with a small gathering of friends in their unique new home. Throughout this period of positive developments, Rebecca maintained careful vigilance regarding the security of their property. The government monitoring systems functioned as promised, becoming less intrusive after the initial calibration period, while maintaining effective surveillance of potential threats. The secure communication line remained available, but unneeded as weeks passed without further incidents. Frank Mitchell visited regularly, ostensibly to check on the renovation progress, but clearly also monitoring the security situation personally. His grandfather-like relationship with Sophie blossomed with the retired communications specialist, sharing carefully sanitized stories about his Cold War service that fascinated the historically minded 10-year-old. Did you really have to memorize special code words? Sophie asked during one such visit, as Frank helped her arrange books in the bunker's converted library space. Absolutely. Authentication codes that change daily. Without the correct response, nothing happened, no matter how urgent the message seemed. Frank demonstrated with exaggerated formality. Copper Summit Authentication Bravo 79er. Then you'd wait for the countersign. What if you forgot the code? There were backup procedures, but you didn't forget, not when you understood what was at stake. Frank's expression turned momentarily serious before brightening again. But mostly we just monitored regular communications, making sure the network stayed operational. Less dramatic than the movies make it seem. Rebecca observed these interactions with mixed feelings, appreciation for Frank's kindness and educational approach, concern about Sophie's growing fascination with Cold War history. Yet her daughter's interest remained healthy and academic, focused on the historical significance rather than the apocalyptic scenarios the infrastructure had been designed to address. One crisp November afternoon, as Rebecca worked in her underground office while Sophie practiced violin in the adjacent room, an alert sounded on her computer. Not the government security system, but her own personal monitoring setup that tracked the renovation team's access to their property. The camera feed showed a utility truck parking outside, not one of their regular contractors. Two workers in standard electric company coveralls approached the building, carrying equipment cases and consulting what appeared to be work orders. Rebecca immediately activated the internal communication system. "Sophie, please come to my office right away." Her daughter appeared moments later, violin still in hand. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Probably nothing, but we have unscheduled visitors. I want you to stay with me until I verify who they are." Rebecca switched her monitor to display all external camera feeds, watching as the workers examined the electric meter on the side of the building. Their behavior seemed professional and routine, yet something felt wrong. The timing of their visit coinciding with a day when the regular renovation team was absent, the lack of prior notification for utility work. She activated the secure communication line, pressing the red button beneath the standard keypad. "Security response, go ahead." The immediate answer was professionally calm. "This is Rebecca Turner at Eastern Pfeifen. Two utility workers have arrived unscheduled. Philadelphia Electric Company uniforms, white utility truck license plate, PFC 3442. Stand by, we're verifying." The response was immediate and efficient. Within 30 seconds, the voice returned with noticeable tension. "Ms. Turner, those individuals are not authorized utility personnel. Security team is 4 minutes out. Please implement lockdown procedures as outlined in your facility protocol." Rebecca's heart raced as she activated the enhanced security measures Frank had shown her, a modern interface controlling Cold War-era protection systems. With a few keystrokes, the property's defensive features engaged, reinforced doors locked automatically, electronic surveillance intensified, and both the main level and bunker transitioned to independent power to prevent external interruption of essential systems. "What's happening, Mom?" Sophie asked, her voice steady despite the obvious concern in her eyes. "Just a security precaution," Rebecca explained, calmly, not wanting to frighten her daughter unnecessarily. "Some people who shouldn't be here are outside. The security team is coming to talk to them." On the monitor, the utility workers had abandoned their pretense and were now examining the building's access points more systematically. One returned to their truck, retrieving what appeared to be specialized electronic equipment, likely detection or bypass technology for security systems. "Are they trying to break in?" Sophie asked, watching the monitor with remarkable composure. "Because of the special room?" "I think so, yeah," Rebecca acknowledged, seeing no benefit in lying to her perceptive daughter. "But they won't get in, and help is already on the way." As if on cue, the monitor showed two black SUVs approaching at high speed, converging on the property from different directions. The intruders immediately abandoned their equipment and ran for their utility truck, but were intercepted before they could escape. The security response was swift and professional. The intruders subdued and secured within moments, their vehicle and equipment seized for investigation. One of the security team members approached the building and spoke directly to the external camera. "Ms. Turner, this is Agent Delgado. The situation is contained. Please maintain lockdown until we complete our sweep of the perimeter." Rebecca kept Sophie close as they watched the security team methodically inspect the entire property, checking for any devices that might have been planted or damage that might have been done. After approximately 20 minutes, the secure communication line activated. "Ms. Turner, the property is clear. You can disengage the lockdown protocols. Agent Peterson is en route to brief you personally." As Rebecca deactivated the security measures, restoring the building to its normal operation, she was struck by the surreal efficiency of the response. What might have been a terrifying home invasion attempt had been resolved with clinical precision, the result of invisible security systems protecting a Cold War relic that happened to be their home. "Are we safe now?" Sophie asked as the monitors showed the security team loading the intruders into one of their vehicles. Yes, completely safe, Rebecca assured her, amazed by her daughter's resilience. The security systems worked exactly as they should. Like when you said this place used to help keep people safe during scary times. It's still doing that, but for us. Rebecca hugged her daughter close, marveling at the profound truth in her simple observation. The facility that had once stood ready to preserve government function through nuclear devastation was now protecting a single mother and her violin-playing daughter, a very different mission, but perhaps equally meaningful in its own way. Peterson arrived 30 minutes later, his typically composed demeanor showing signs of strain. Rebecca received him in the main living area, while Sophie returned to her practice room underground, the familiar routine of violin scales providing a comforting background to the serious conversation above. The intruders have been identified as professional technology acquisition specialists, Peterson explained without preamble, industrial espionage experts who typically work for private collectors or foreign interests. After Cold War technology, specifically targeting emergency network components, we believe they're working for the same collector who attempted to acquire this property at auction. Rebecca processed this information. What exactly are they after? Most of the sensitive equipment has been removed. Peterson hesitated, clearly calculating how much to reveal. Not everything. Certain components of these facilities had unique capabilities that remain relevant. The analog nature of some systems makes them resistant to modern cyber vulnerabilities. The physical authentication mechanisms can't be hacked remotely. And these collectors want that technology or the knowledge of how it was implemented. Cold War communication security involved approaches fundamentally different from current encryption methods. There's value in that alternative perspective, especially for entities seeking to develop systems resistant to contemporary surveillance capabilities. The implications were clear enough. The Cold War infrastructure beneath Rebecca's home contained principles and approaches to secure communication that remain valuable decades later, perhaps even more valuable in an era of digital vulnerability. Will they try again? She asked the question that mattered most for Sophie's safety. It's possible, though today's failure will likely cause them to reassess. The response time and security level they encountered would make most rational actors seek easier targets. Peterson's expression softened slightly. But we're not taking chances. I've authorized a permanent security detail for your property, discreet but continuous coverage. Armed guards outside our home. Nothing so obvious. Integrated surveillance with rapid response capabilities. You'll hardly notice their presence, but they'll be available within minutes if needed. As Peterson provided details about these enhanced security measures, Rebecca found herself in the surreal position of discussing professional security details and counterintelligence measures for a converted mechanic shop in small-town Pennsylvania. The ordinary home she had sought had evolved into something extraordinary, a private residence with government-level protection due to its historical significance and lingering strategic value. There's one more thing, Peterson added, his tone shifting to something almost apologetic. Given these developments, we're requesting permission to reinstall certain monitoring equipment in the lower level, specifically in the original communications center. It would allow us to better track potential electronic intrusion attempts. You want to reactivate parts of the emergency network node? Rebecca clarified, surprised by this reversal of their decommissioning plans. In a limited capacity, yes. The monitoring would be passive, no active communication functions, simply detection capabilities. It would enhance not only our security response, but your family's safety as well. Rebecca considered this request carefully. If I agree, I want something in return beyond the security enhancements. What did you have in mind? Educational access. If this facility retains historical and strategic significance, it should serve an educational purpose as well. I want authorization to develop a limited historical program, perhaps twice yearly open houses for students studying Cold War history, with appropriate security measures and content review. Peterson looked genuinely surprised by this request. You want to turn a former emergency network node into an educational exhibit? A very limited, carefully managed one. These facilities shaped American history, yet most people know nothing about them. Sophie's generation should understand this chapter of our past, the infrastructure created to preserve government function through unimaginable crisis. After a thoughtful pause, Peterson nodded slowly. It's an unusual request, but potentially valuable from a public education perspective. I believe we could develop appropriate protocols for limited access events with proper content review and security measures. This negotiated agreement trading enhanced monitoring for educational opportunities felt like an appropriate evolution of their relationship with the government agencies involved. Rebecca was no longer merely reacting to their security concerns, but actively shaping the future role of the historical facility she now called home. After Peterson departed, Rebecca joined Sophie in the underground practice room, listening to her daughter work through a challenging passage of Vivaldi with remarkable focus. The concrete walls that had once housed emergency communication systems now contained the soaring notes of a violin played by a 10-year-old girl with dreams of symphony orchestras. "Everything okay with the security people?" Sophie asked during a break, adjusting her sheet music. "Everything's fine. They're going to add some additional security features to keep our home safe." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Mitchell told me these rooms were built to protect important things during dangerous times. Now they're protecting us. I think that's what they were really meant for all along." Rebecca was struck by her daughter's perspective, the wisdom of seeing their home not as an obsolete relic of Cold War paranoia, but as a structure finally fulfilling its true purpose, providing security and stability for a family that needed it. "I think you're exactly right," she agreed. "And I've arranged for something special. Twice a year we'll be able to invite your class or other students to learn about the history of this place, with proper supervision, of course." Sophie's eyes widened with excitement. "Really, we can show people the special rooms and tell them about the Cold War communication systems? Within certain limits, yes. Because understanding history is important, especially the parts that were once kept secret." As Sophie returned to her practice with renewed enthusiasm, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them here from the brink of homelessness to becoming custodians of a historical facility that retained enough strategic value to warrant government protection. The abandoned mechanic shop she had purchased out of desperate necessity had provided far more than affordable housing. It had become a unique home that connected them to a hidden chapter of American history, provided unexpected financial stability through government cooperation, and now offered educational opportunities to share its significance with future generations. Outside, unmarked security vehicles maintained their discreet vigil, protecting both a Cold War relic and the family that had given it new purpose. Above ground, the converted mechanic shop blended into the small town landscape, its brick exterior offering no hint of the historical significance within. Below, the reinforced concrete bunker that had once stood ready for nuclear apocalypse now resonated with violin music, a different kind of emergency network connecting past to present historical necessity to human resilience. Rebecca listened to her daughter's music, filling spaces designed for crisis communication, the notes echoing against walls built to withstand the unthinkable. The Cold War architects who had created this facility could never have imagined this particular future for their strategic infrastructure, a single mother and her violin-playing daughter, transforming a node in the emergency network into something it had never been intended to be, but perhaps had always been destined to become a home.